Hey, it's Justin with SparkPoint University. In this video, I'm going to walk through an example of the most critical aspect of software development, readability. We're going to take a look at a function that shows poor structure and hard to read semantics, and then improve it. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and like this video. So let's get right into it. Take a look at this function. Does it seem, overly complicated for what it's doing? All of it's supposed to be doing is kind of inserting a product record into a database. But yet there are a number of things that can make this code hard to maintain and read. So let's walk through some of them. One, we have multiple nested if statements. And not only that, there are else statements. You can see those down here if you look closely enough. There's SQL on multiple lines using concatenation. Although not inherently bad, it does make it kind of hard to read sometimes. Bad brackets. This is, you have to come up with a style. Some people like to do it at the end of an if statement, but it's not real clear sometimes where these things start and stop. So it's not the default way in Visual Studio. And then poor indentation. Where does this throw belong? Does it belong with this else statement? Is it after this if? This is hard to understand. Now, if you look at it close enough, you can, of course, walk through a step-by-step. Okay, product name is not equal to null. It's not an empty string. I think that's empty string. Is there any characters in there that maybe, I don't know. I don't see any characters, but I think it's empty string. Skew, okay. I guess that makes sense. And then you have your SQL executor being created, and then you're executing the SQL statement, and it's insert product. What are the values? Product name skew. This even has a bug in it. And then select scope identity, but it's kind of inline, so you have to definitely find it. To me, this is very hard to read. Yeah, you could get through it, but can we make it better? I think we can make this a lot better. So one of the first things you do is when you're trying to refactor and make things, more readable, is to first try to get rid of nesting. Like nesting in general just hurts, right? You have to keep track of which if statement you're in or which else statement you're in. Now this is a pretty easy and contrived example, but there are many times in many legacy code bases that I've been where you'll see an if statement, you'll see an else statement, there's a bunch of code in the else statement, and then you have more if statements in there, and then more and more and more and more. Well, we want to avoid that. So what we can do is we can take the concept of failing fast, right, or exiting early. As much as humanly possible, you want to get out of the function quickly. So let's do that first. First thing we need to do is break down some logic. So in order to do this, we really just got to see what it's doing. So we have, okay, product name is not equal to null, and product name is not equal to, hopefully, an empty string, which is a readability problem. Like, is this an empty string? Well, I wrote it. I'm saying yes. Let's go ahead and prove that first. Let's just say that it's an empty string by saying string.empty. Okay, already better. Now, if you've been in CSharp for a while, you'll definitely know that there's also a string.isNull or empty, or isNull or white space. Maybe we can use that here. But first, we need to make sure that these if statements don't do anything suspicious. So if, then we jump in. We have an else, throw. Okay, then we have another if, throw. And these are the same exceptions, so I think we're okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to combine these two exceptions into one, and we're going to then negate this if statement. So let's take it one step at a time. First, we're going to do is if product name is not equal to null, and product name is not equal to string.empty. When you have nested if statements, that is the same as doing an and operation, right? An or operation is when you have them in parallel, whereas when you do an and, they happen in sequence. And so in this case, they're in sequence, so I think we're good. So that helps me there. Else, so we want to fix this. See, I'm going to go ahead and fix the brackets while I'm at it too. You see here, brackets are on new lines. The else is a part of this bracket. That's a pretty standard way to do it. I like the way that looks because it doesn't add a new line for every little thing. So let's pull this and let's go here. Okay. Well, that's much better. All right, so let's get rid of these two lines. Let's get rid of these lines, and we'll put these inside the if statement. Oh, look, it even formatted it for us. That's nice in Visual Studio. And that's something that really, some of these things that I'm doing is actually really hard to do. Visual Studio does a great job of auto-formatting for you. So in this case, it does help, but it's still, you still have to guess, right, to some degree. I mean, what if there was another statement under here and somebody did another, like, which one does it throw? It's very important that we try to use braces when we are focused on non-single line if-else statements. I'll explain that a little bit later. But going back to this, okay, so we've made it a little bit better. We have our else statement here, but why don't we do the same thing for skew? So skew, same thing, not equal to null, skew is not equal to empty string. We can do the same thing. So let's do skew is not equal to null, and skew is not equal to string.empty. Okay, perfect. And the else statement down here is a skew is empty, and they are the same. So because they're the same, we can combine these. Okay. The reason we can combine them is that the else statement is the exact same. If they were different, or if the if statements were different, you couldn't do that. You have to work out the logic, the Boolean logic that goes with that. But ultimately, these were the exact same. I think we're good. Okay. So now I have both of them, but I almost feel like this is a little bit harder to read now because I've now combined these things up. I have less lines of code, which is good, but now it feels like these things are really bunched together and they still have nested ifs, and these else statements drive me nuts. So one thing we can do is we can do a couple things. One is we can pull this out into its own function, right? We can say is product, or we can validate, right? Is valid. But I don't know that I want to do that yet. Why don't we just use the built-in string is null or empty? Because is null or empty, but see, there's an or in there. Is null or empty. Well, we have an and here. So we have to do some Boolean logic. And one way you can do that is you can actually, to invert something, like a not statement of, say, A not equal to, say, B, and A not equal to C, you basically invert everything inside of it. So then we can say that this is equivalent to A is equal to B, or A is equal to C. So if product name equals null, or product name equals string, we have now inverted it. So what is that equivalent to? That is equivalent to, in our case, string dot is null or empty. Now, the fact of the matter is we still want to invert it because this is the inversion. So we inverted the equation, so to speak, to get this, which is equivalent to is null or empty. So to get this back, we have to invert it back. So what we're really looking for is this. We want not string is null or empty for product name. Easy enough, but I thought I'd explain it just to give you guys an idea of how the Boolean logic can work. All right. So string dot is null or empty, product name. Okay, that's easier to look at. Let's do it again. String dot is null or empty, skew. Now, in the case where you don't have something built into .NET, this should just be a function. And we could have done that down here. We could create our own function for is null or empty, and then just reference that private function. And that would have been just as valid. But see, here's an issue I have too, is I still have these else statements, and it still feels very nested. So when a throw operation occurs, it's going to exit out of the function. Well, why don't we just try to exit out the function quickly? Well, I think that's going to be a lot easier. So what if we just invert this and say if string dot is null or empty, product name, then we will just throw product name. Oh, this exception. So product name is empty. Okay, well, it does the exact same logic here. And the reason it does is because it will never reach this if statement. This statement is never reached. So I can read this, say, is it null or empty? No, it's not null or empty. It means it has something in it. So it's going to move on to the next one. We can assume after this point that there's something inside the product name, which is good. If we do have a problem, it's going to throw this exception and bubble up and move on out of the function. Of course, you don't have to throw an exception. It could be just as simple as doing a return, but we jumped out early. So let's do the next one. So same thing with the skew. Why not just jump out early? So we're going to invert this. Let's get rid of these. And let's grab this. Okay, so now I can read this top to bottom and understand it a little bit better. I know it's okay. Is null or empty? No, or then we're going to throw this. Is null or empty skew? Okay, then we're going to throw this. And then I'm going to create my executor. Then I'm going to execute, and then I'm done. I think that's a lot better. However, I think the only thing I'm really kind of struggling with this one is what about this SQL statement? This doesn't feel right to me, and it's funny looking. Like it's not how you would write it in SSMS or anything like that. I mean, maybe a little bit, but wouldn't it be nice if this stuff is a little bit, I don't know, more easily formatted? Let's try to format this better. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull this out. So let's do a constant string. Let's call it SQL, and we're gonna say we're just gonna copy some of this stuff in. Okay. I believe SQL needs to be formatted just as well as anything else, especially from a readability standpoint. Readability is hugely important when it comes to these type of things to grasp the logic of the SQL that you're trying to execute. So let's do this. Okay, we're going to put that in line. Then we're going to replace this. There we go. I did forget this earlier, which was going to be product name equals product name, and skew equals skew. And it automatically formatted it for me. Very cool. Okay, so now what about making this look better? I like my SQL to be a little bit better formatted, where things are on multiple lines, it's well tabbed in. And so what I tend to do is I use the @ sign, which allows you to do kind of like this pre-formatted line breaks, and everything is all built into the string. So I can actually hit enter here, and I can hit enter at the end of this as well. So I want to insert into products, product name and SKU. And these are my values. And at the end of that, I want to do a select scope. I like to actually have a break in here with these semicolons. And the reason I like that is because it does break the statements up. So then I can tab this in. I like to tab it in just like this, where it almost feels like a block of code, right? So you have your opener, which is your constant string SQL, and you have your closer, which is at the same level of tabulation, indentation of the closing quote. And then these are all tabbed in once, just like you would see a function, um, or even like this new object here. And then I have on the top level, I have the columns, and on the bottom level, I have my values. And the last statement, which is a new statement, is just a select identity. Now, this I think feels a lot better. You can look at it directly and see exactly what it's doing. And even better, if we wanted to, is we could actually insert comments here, right? Comments here. We could do a lot of stuff if we wanted to, right? But for now, I think that works. I think that looks pretty good. Now, is there anything else we can do? So I think what we can do lastly is we can maybe shorten this up a little bit, right? Is there any reason to have these brackets here? Probably not. This return statement's a one-line executor. I think we can make this look just a little bit better. Having all the extra characters, although not a big deal, does kind of muddy things up a little bit. So how can we make this look a little better? So we can do new here if I wanted to. The weight probably doesn't belong there. You know what? The weight's funny. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to make this a task. We'll make this an async task. Should have been done the first time anyways. We'll do this. And we will await this. Okay. Now, the only thing I would do a little differently is maybe I'd throw this here. See how this looks. That can be a little confusing because of execute async, then your execute scalar async. Feels a little funny. So why don't we go back the way it was? This feels a little bit more appropriate. So your parameters being input, of course, is your SQL, and then you know exactly what you're passing in, product name and SKU. Now, there's other ways to approach this. This one's probably more preferential for me, and I wouldn't be as critical of seeing code like this, or even the other way we just did it, just because it's kind of complicated with the lambda statement sitting in there. However, jumping out of methods quickly, I think is a huge benefit I like that it plays like a story because anybody that comes into the code can read top to bottom and not have to jump through the method multiple times. Okay, here's the if statement, here's the else statement. So the benefit is that you can be linear in your thinking, linear in your reading. And the more linear it is, the more spacing we have. And you can notice here I put a space in between these. If I didn't have spaces, you immediately make it harder to read. So having those spaces between lines, also hugely important to readability. And now this is very simple for new developers on the project to come in and see what's going on. Hope this helps. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and we'll see you next time.